It is the top of the hour. So I would like to welcome everybody to our first Friday with a thought leader. Most of you I have seen before, so welcome back. For those who are joining us, welcome for the first time. My name is Nicholas Caillet. I am the co-founder and president of Corentus, and thrilled you could be with us. And with that, I am super thrilled to bring Alexander in to introduce Amy Fox as our thought leader and her new book, Leading in Chaos.
First of all, here's how we're going to run this today. So we set it up. I'm going to introduce Amy, and then I'm going to say a few words that come from my heart about Amy. Then we'll hand the ball over to Amy. She has a few slides to share. We'll talk about the book and whatever else she'd like to do. And then we'll have a conversation, Amy and I will have a conversation with some questions. And then we're going to reserve time at the end for all of you to have the opportunity to ask Amy questions as well. So it's going to be a full 55 minutes together, and we're hoping for a really rich and meaningful conversation. So with that, let me introduce Amy. I'm going to read from the bio just so I get it absolutely right. So Amy Elizabeth Fox is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Mobius Executive Leadership, which is a global transformational leadership firm. For the last 20 years, she has served as a leadership and culture change advisor to eminent professional services firms and Fortune 500 companies and has facilitated, I'm going to add the word very immersive executive development programs for senior leaders. In 2026, she co-authored Leading in Chaos with Nicholas Janni. Amy is considered an expert in vertical development and trauma-informed work organization. So that's the formal bio. What I'd like to share is my experience of Amy and why I'm excited today, especially about this book, which I read. So Amy to me is first and foremost a friend, a very important friend, who has accompanied me through all kinds of phases in my life. And she is also a colleague, and she is a mentor and somebody that I deeply respect and that I hold in very high regard for her brilliance in what we're about to discover, but also her courage to say what needs to be said in a way that is one part radical, one part mystical, and one part very practical, and says it in a way that like I said, needs to be said, and that's what we're going to do today. So, Amy, you know how I feel about you. I have a lot of love for you. I love you. And I'm just really, really happy to be here with you today. So, with that, I'll hand it over to you, and it's your time.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, the love is utterly mutual, and I want to double click before I share my slides about the notion of saying what needs to be said right now. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us at this incredibly important, I think, collective inflection point. It feels really poignant to me to be meeting in the wake of what's gone on for the last week and talking about the importance of healing and awakening in the world of business, but in the world writ large. And I'm deeply grateful, Alexander, for your own pioneering and courageous work in bringing healing and consciousness to teams over many decades. So it's a joy to gather with your community. And let me just share some slides that I think will at least allow us to be on the same page of the kinds of things I've been thinking about really deeply for the last many years. So the book has a phrase which says, chaos is the new black. Because when I started to research all the advice about how do leaders function well and productively and respond to a chaotic moment, all the advice systematically suggested that the chaos they would be confronted with would be a temporary crisis, a moment in time, and that the thing to do was to troubleshoot quickly and return as quickly as possible to a stable state. Except I don't think that's the moment we're in. I think the moment that we're in is a moment of constant churn It's going to be ongoing, a demand for adaptive change. I think the expectation that tomorrow looks like today is beyond what this moment is going to provide us. I think we're in a time of exponential change, rapid change, catalytic change. And as a result, we can expect that the leaders that we work with are in a state of rather constant stress and disorientation, and to some degree, anxiety. To put the work that Nicholas and I have done on leading in chaos in the context of the history of leadership development, and I won't say a lot about this, but I think the context of our field of practice evolving is worth a moment's time. When I started doing leadership development work 30 years ago, the work was largely focused on skill development, on behavioral change, on helping leaders to be more effective in the everyday transactions that they were conducting as a result of team meetings, interventions, projects, collaborations. So the training was largely transactional. It was very practical. It was very short, and it focused on themes like feedback, difficult conversations, influence without authority, helping people think systemically. And all of that work, that sort of best practice thought leadership, is still relevant today. People still need to be able to give each other developmental coaching. People still need to be able to manage a complex stakeholder map. People still need advice and guidance and support to have high performing teams. So this is not to say we moved from these competencies to another set. It's to say we reached a moment or a threshold where that was necessary but insufficient. And at that point, we started to live in a world in which people were talking about leading in complexity, or VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And then you started to see requests for us as practitioners to help people turbocharge their capacity for innovation, to learn competencies and mindsets that worked for change agility, to help people arrive at a certain degree of psychological safety in order to co-create and to enable collective intelligence, to focus on enterprise-wide viewpoints so that they could look at cross-functional collaboration, and of course the all-important movement for increasing diversity of thought and diversity of inclusion of various cultural dimensions of the workforce. I think we're now at a crossroads where people in organizations that are responsible for leadership development are going to do one of two things as things get increasingly chaotic. They're either going to backlash to a world of command and control and behavioral interventions and short-term ROI and take us all the way back to the beginning, or they're going to enter what we could think of as a transformational time, a time of emotional and spiritual intelligence, a time of the feminine principle gaining some traction in the expression of organizational cultures. And there we're going to start to see movements for mindfulness training, an emphasis on including a diversity of voices at the table, the ability, as my friend Otto Scharmer talks about, to work with emergence and dance with a constant swirl of information, to plant the spark of creativity and inspiration into the fabric of daily life inside of organizations, to have a future of work that has work-life balance and humanizes the workplace. And I hope that we will also see an increase in leaders, senior leaders, asking their organizations to take account for ways they've violated the fabric of life in the conducting of their business, and to care for the social good and the ecological well-being and the communities in which they operate. The term that's been given to this time by Jaime Casco is BANI, and I think it does, as it is intended to do, give us a good description of how people are firsthand experiencing the intensity and demands of this moment. BANI is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. That's what it stands for. Brittle, meaning the systems we rely on are constantly breaking down. Anxious, meaning the uncertainty and constant novelty and unpredictability are raising people's stress levels. Nonlinear, meaning we're not in a world in which you can reliably strategize for things to unfold in a predictable and orchestrated manner. And incomprehensible, meaning we're at the foot of the mystery. So what does that require in traditional terms? I'm going to give it in traditional terms, and then I'm going to give it in energetic and mystical terms. In traditional terms, it requires some new capabilities that leaders need to stretch to embrace. One is pattern spotting, because we're not going to be able to take in data and immediately pump out an analytic response that is wide enough and uh, I'm missing the word, but emergent enough, let's say, to really capture a fast moving, fast changing picture where lots of causalities are intersecting in unpredictable ways. You're going to have to be able to intuit what in a very complex picture matters and where there are patterns emerging that you can experiment with and iterate with to start to gain some new reconnaissance about what's really happening in terms of diagnosing the picture and what's really needed in terms of responding to the picture. The second is skills around experimentation. My friend Amy Edmondson recently produced a book on the importance of the right kind of failure. We have to help organizations learn to tolerate a way of learning that's iterative and experimental and creative, and to consistently be incorporating the data that they're getting back from their safe to fail experiments into novel mini transformations and ultimately into large scale organizational movement. The third one is a new kind of sense making, and that sense making is more emotional, it's more embodied, it's being able to tap into the diversity of intelligences that have been undervalued and unwelcome in the workplace up until now, where we only preferenced mental activity, cognitive insight, linear thinking. Now we're really going to have to require ourselves to open up and cultivate intelligence, intuition, and insight coming from the fresh wind of the future through our dreams, through our journaling, through our time in silence, through our time in dialogue with one another. There's going to be a whole new skill set around collective sense making. I think the urgency of collaboration and diversity is going to be increased as things get more and more chaotic, but also more intricate and interwoven. In order to get a good sense of what's happening, we're going to have to entertain many voices at the table. And leaders are going to have to, instead of relying on their expertise and experience, rely on their ability to facilitate conversation into true collective intelligence. And ultimately, we're going to have to help leaders tolerate and cultivate an inner patience with what they can't know and what's uncertain and what we can't predict. In mystical terms, that means a different thing. It means energetically that we have to help leaders to cultivate a kind of centering practice, a groundedness, an embodiedness. This is about helping people to have practices of contemplation, meditation. They also, as they can less and less rely on external resources and structures and systems to be anchors, they're going to have to increasingly be able to rely on their own set of values and principles and ethics to align their choices and to give them comfort that even though they don't know if how they're acting is going to have efficacy, it at the very least has alignment. I think it's a time that calls us to have some relationship to a higher power where our faith in each other, our faith in the future, our faith in what's possible has to become a fertile field of co-inspiration. And of course, I think in the swirl of chaos, we're being encouraged to create pockets of refuge for stillness, for spaciousness, for receptivity. It's a time where passivity is moist with possibility. On the side of anxiety, or we could say even fear that leaders are walking around with, I think they're going to need skills for self-observation, to know when they're triggered, to have strategies for calming themselves down, for soothing their nervous system. And I think we're going to have to train teams to both spot when somebody's off balance or the whole team is getting fractionalized or escalating towards unnecessary conflict, and to downregulate or co-regulate their nervous systems and treat stress as an active team derailer that we know how to observe, and address. I think we're going to have to help organizations widen their degree of tolerance for productive disequilibrium because as I said, the adaptive demand is only going to get worse. And so if teams go numb or defensive or resist change, you're going to get an kind of intractable system. So you have to help people lower their level of fear and increase their confidence that the change will not have a loss embedded in it for them, and that will allow them to widen the degree of adaptive dancing that they can do with the circumstances that are in constant movement. Because we're under more stress, people are also going to need more time for rest, for renewal, for restoration of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally. And I think maybe another very primary thing this moment asks of us is to really slow down. So much of business is being conducted in a frenzy. We're making our decisions in, split seconds, things that need real reflection, things that need real conversation, things that require wise answers and responses are going to need us to operate at a different pace. So at the very least, we have to help senior leaders and senior teams consciously choose the pace or cadence with which they're interacting and responding to circumstances, and be able to distinguish things that need an immediate response from things that need a wise response. In terms of the degree of nonlinearity, I think we're going to have to learn to think synergistically and look for parallels in very different contexts and organizations and artistic contexts, culturally creative contexts, to learn to pull on and draw on input from things way outside of our company and outside the boundaries of our industry. I think we're going to see very wonderfully generative cross-boundary collaborations and partnerships emerging, because no one function is going to have the potential to address such a constantly complex picture. We're going to have to cultivate exponential imagination, because things are not going to move in incremental change, and tomorrow is conceivably going to look radically different than today. So we have to imagine a future that doesn't take the givens of today and copy paste them onto tomorrow, but starts to be really expansive in terms of what we dream we can do. We're going to have to look at exegeses, which, as I said, is sort of adjacent contexts for information and for early signals of what's coming. And we're going to have to get you comfortable with a certain degree of dynamism being a part of our daily lives. In terms of how incomprehensible things are going to get, I mentioned collective intelligence already, but I think also the importance of senior leaders being able to transform their egoic attachment to their being right, to their being in charge, to their being expert, and have the humility to cultivate a kind of constant curiosity about what might be changing, what might not be the way I've always thought it to be, what might I be missing, and to be walking through the world in an open-hearted and intellectually porous manner in which they can constantly be matured by life. We're going to have to be able to narrow and define what our scope of influence is and what we can't control. I think the 12-step recovery prayer is going to become our best friend, to know the difference between what's in our sphere of influence and what to which we have to simply surrender and yield. I think we're going to need to take much longer in the diagnostic phase of problems or crises to understand even what we're looking at, because things are going to be intersecting and interacting in ways that are so complexly entwined that if we simply go with our first impression and try to respond to that, we're going to miss the root causes of what's happening, and we're going to use too superficial an antidote. And then finally, I think we're going to have to manage the shock field, because when people are constantly being barraged by not just new information, but violence and dissembling of systems and ecological crisis and great pain, everybody's nervous systems move naturally into a kind of trauma field or shock field. And so the thought that people can simply go into the workplace and operate as if their nervous systems weren't in a heightened state of agitation and arousal, will no longer be possible. And we're going to have places within the organization in which people can stop and exhale and help each other to calm their nerves, really. So lastly, I think I'll stop in a moment because I'm really eager to have this dialogue with Alexander and with all of you. I think it's a time where we're going to have to befriend the mystery. We're going to have to look for the companionship of perennial wisdom, poetry, music, art, prayer, spiritual wisdom, spiritual teachers, spiritual guidance. I don't think this time is manageable purely from a Cartesian dimension. I think it's the time of the numinous. And what's beautiful about that is that I think people will start to feel and be more aware of the blessing field that we all have available to us, and which can be a constant source of grace in our lives. So.
Yeah, I just want to.
Very sweet.
It's that was a beautiful. That was beautiful. Let's take a deep breath on that, and let me dive right in, Amy, with the book, because that's there's so much there, and I have about 1,000 questions, but I've reduced it to a few. The first one is a little practical, which is the book is a series of essays.
Mm.
It's a whole series of short 1, 2, 3 page essays that you and Nicholas wrote. And I found myself reading an essay and then absorbing, incubating, integrating. Sometimes I just wanted to sit with the essay for a while. What was the impetus to go with essays in this book? What were you thinking?
I mean, on the one hand, we were thinking everybody's very busy and,
Yeah.
inundated with a tremendous amount of information. And by writing it as sort of short chapters, it might be more amenable to people integrating it into their daily work lives. But I think more importantly, the book talks about some very difficult topics like trauma, like colonialism, like violence, and equally, it talks about some beautiful, hopeful topics like prayer, like emotional expression, like healing, awakening. And each essay is really very powerful in the sense of surfacing conversations that are normally we're not allowed to have. And exactly as you said, they really do require
Yeah.
letting them permeate you, letting them resonate with your own experience, letting them be a provocation for your own healing, letting you have a conversation about what arises for you as you read it and encounter the invitation that it's making. So we're hoping that they're like homeopathic doses that start to help organizational culture to unlock and take out of the closet some of these conversations that we have not yet been allowed to have.
Yeah. That was my experience. I could see when I get the hard-covered book, using it as a daily meditation.
That's what
Wake
you're doing.
up, open the book, read an essay, and go with it and see what happens. Well, I want to jump into some of the parts of the book that I loved, Amy, and I've got some questions for you. And we'll just start here and we'll see where we go as we always do. But there was one passage where you wrote, um, we argue that you cannot have true collaboration without generosity.
Mm.
In turn, that generosity requires moving from a false emphasis on personal resilience and autonomy to surrendering into the need for interdependence and mutuality. And I really got a sense from your book that there's a calling to leaders to really expand. I mean, first to go deep and take a look
Mm.
and take a look deeply at what's going on and what's getting in the way, but then to expand. So it's this motion. Can you talk just a bit more about what that invitation is and how can leaders do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think many of the teams that have come into our leadership programs have been working together for a number of years, and they know very little about each other's personal lives, each other's personal aspirations, each other's fears. And when you take them through a process of unfolding and revealing more of their interiority, but also more of their life experience, where they come from, what their ancestors went through, what the hardships are that shape their neurology and therefore how they dysfunction when they dysfunction on that team. When you build real mutual understanding and compassion and I would argue love between them, then you have really an actualized version of what Amy calls psychological safety, not just because you went out for drinks or you took a ropes course, but because you have a, a penetrating understanding of each other's psyche, and also a natural arising of solidarity and care for one another, which is going to refashion how that team functions from that moment on. And I believe that level of mutual investment in each other's well-being and each other's ideas and each other's efforts makes it safer to say I need help, makes it safer to say something's going on in my personal life and I can't show up at my best right now, makes it easier to do a candid after action review when something goes wrong so you actually get continuous improvement, makes it easier for everybody to be on guard that we include all the voices at the table. There are many, many team functions that come out of what might be called soft skills of going on that deep immersive dive of intimate healing together.
Love that. This call for leaders to step into this and to befriend the mystery and engage with Banning the way that you're saying requires leaders to really look deep inside. There is deep personal work here. And many people on this call are coaches, consultants, facilitators, trainers. There's a whole group of people here. Um, what is the best avenue to help leaders do this work? Where do they go, and how do we take them through that when sometimes all we have is an hour a week coaching, or we have such limited time?
Yeah.
How do we do this work with them, Amy?
Let me respond to the last thing you said and then answer the general question.
Sure.
Time scarcity is part of the pandemic of the trauma field in which organizational cultures are currently operating. So
Right.
many of the norms that we see and take as givens of what the clients will tell us are possible and not possible are actually trauma informed. So if everybody's walking around with a low level of untreated trauma and therefore numbness and emotional stuffing and isolation and unsafety, they're going to tell you they don't have time because there's a threat involved in taking the time. It's not that they don't have time, it's that they're frightened to take the time. They're frightened to look, exactly as you're saying, Alexander, because it is deep work and it's sometimes painful work and it's always meaningful work. So the first thing I would say is not to buy into the notion that all you have is an hour a day, an hour a week. If you need more time with your client, you should offer more time. You should make a wider value proposition that says to them, I want to accompany you in a more meaningful way. So that's the first thing. I don't think we should take the structure of how coaching has been done historically as necessarily the way we're going to do it going forward. So Mobius 4 years ago started innovating, offering executive retreats where a leader comes and works with us for 2 dedicated days, fully offline with a coach and a therapist. And we're doing about 10 of those a month now. And I think it will only grow. That's the first thing I just want to say. I don't think the structures, I think they're going to be novel structures for doing the work. But the most important thing you can do if you want to introduce a deeper layer of dialogue with your client is to do your own work, because the ceiling on what somebody will confide in you, what they'll look to you to cradle, what they'll ask of you, is how much of the terrain of your inner life you've traveled. And I think all of us on the phone call that have done our deep walk in healing and in awakening would recognize that as we make every exponential leap of integration, of resolution, of expansion, all of a sudden a whole new set of conversations start to arise in our office hours that
Right.
nobody was talking about with us previously. Well, it wasn't that it wasn't there; it was that our hospitality wasn't wide enough to invoke those conversations. So I really believe there's nothing more important than treating yourself as the instrument of the repair. And every minute that you can devote both to
Mm.
your own inner exploration and healing, to being cultivated by true spiritual guides, and also for rest and renewal so that you can be uh, medicine for your client by demonstrating that you don't have to be exhausted to be generating value. You don't have to overgive to have professional self-esteem. Um, I think that's the short answer anyway.
Love it. I love the idea of really breaking through the assumption set
Mm,
about how this work gets done and opening up the possibilities of how it can or could be done
yeah.
and doing the work ourselves, which is where it starts.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I have another question, and then I'm watching time. We have a good time. One that really touched me, and I know I shared this with you, so I want to go here with you because I think you, of all the essays, this one really penetrated my heart. You write in the book, and it's got a couple sentences here, but for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of teaching a session for the Desmond Tutu Fellows of the African Leadership Institute at Oxford University. In this year's session, one of the amazing fellows asked me, "What do you think is the place for weeping in society?" I responded, that I believe that because we are living in a social fabric shaped by generations of untreated trauma, we are a weeping scarce culture. We do not expect, welcome, or demonstrate strong emotions, etc. And so my question for you is the following. This and personally touched me because I have probably years of uncried tears. What's the invitation here, and how do we make crying or sadness or whatever it is, how do we make it okay? And how do we make it permissible in business and organizations and society in general, Amy? Is that okay that I ask you this
Of
question?
course, it's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful question. That
Yeah.
moment will stay with me forever. She asked the question from such a yearning for wholeness. So I would say there's a pandemic of superficiality in business. We don't tell each other what's really going on, and we don't express our full emotional range, not of anger, not of sadness, not of grief, not of longing, not of joy, not of exuberance, not of ecstasy. It's all very vanilla. And I think when you as a practitioner or you as a leader start to take the risk of not denuding your experience, but speaking from its raw essence, you give permission to everyone around you to do the same.
Mm,
And I think that organizations have put such a primacy on autonomy and ambition, individual ambition, that we've put too little of an emphasis on relational belonging. And I often in my leadership programs ask leaders to articulate their relational vocabulary. I frame it this way. Can you tell me what you could do in your organization to ask somebody to
Okay.
support you, not by problem solving, but to support you emotionally? And almost every group of high performing senior leaders I've ever worked with come up with only two things. I could ask somebody to hug me, or I could ask somebody to listen to me. And then there's a sober moment in the room where they also realize, I don't even know who I would ask for that. And then I say, we're going to generate 3 flip charts worth of ways people could emotionally support you. So you guys are going to have to get creative. And then you get all kinds of things on the list, like beautiful things. Somebody could share a story of their history with me. Somebody could share a memory with me. Somebody could cook with me, dance with me, go out and take a walk in nature, meditate with me, pray with me, create something new, teach me a new skill. I mean, endless beauty. And then I ask them 3 things. Sit in a small group and talk about which one of these 100 things are well wired in your life. You know who you could ask, you do ask, and you get that support. What's 1 or 2 you might add? And then the most important question, how beautiful do you feel when you need other people?
mm,
Because so many hero children who later become leaders gifted their family with not needing anything when they were young. If they grew up in a family that was under high distress, they learned to be a parentified child and take on all kinds of responsibility for the household, for their parents, for the other siblings, certainly for themselves. And that not needing became a very strong internal mandate and habit. And when they do need, they feel a lot of shame or sense that that's not just vulnerable, but weak, less professional. And I'm trying to rewire that understanding to say we all need each other. We should be in a thriving state of interdependence and community in a workplace and on a team. And it is possible. I've seen it over and over and over that when people journey together for just a little bit, a few days in the deep waters of their lives, the natural byproduct of that is a more emotionally safe and emotionally expressive environment.
I think you're all getting a sense of what this book is like because this is what this book is like. So what I like to do, Amy, I have so many more, but I want to invite the group to ask questions, but I am going to reserve one question for myself at the end
Wonderful.
that I'd like to ask you before we go, but let's open it up to the group. Does anybody have any questions? Just raise your hand digitally, and we'll give you a chance to ask Amy some questions, and I'll take a look at who's showing up. All right, Julie, jump in. And then I
Hi,
see
Amy. Thank you for being with us today. I wanted to go back to something you started to talk about, but I think there may be more there. And I'm just going to read what I wrote down so I get it right. The call you're making for leaders to engage and develop in this far more transformational way, I think is likely to put individuals out of joint with the people in their personal life. And I'm wondering how we support people being aware that as that individual changes, their orientation to members of their family, either their original family or their current family, will begin to shift and change, and those people may not be keeping up. And how do we invite that in when people can't go to a Mobius retreat or something like that?
I'm going to answer it two ways, Julie. Thank you for the question and the sensitivity that's portrayed in the question. First is one of the ways I think our interventions may have to shift is that we may have to stop thinking of the executive as our client and think of their whole family system as our client. So we at Mobius have started to do family constellation workshops where executives come with their spouse. We've done retreats with executives and their parents. We've done retreats for executives and their children. We have an ongoing commitment to any alumni of a Mobius program to provide counseling if their adolescent is in a situation of self-harming or vulnerability, because we know there's been a huge rise in teenage depression and anxiety and suicidality. So I think one invitation of this moment is to widen the fabric of our care to be whole system, whole family help. That's part of my answer. The second part of my answer is it puts me in mind your question of what my teacher Thomas Hubel talks about as the second test. And we talk about this as we're transitioning people out of a leadership intervention. So the first test is, can I make the change? And the second equally important test is, can I be fidelitous to this change in the face of change back signals that my family or my system gives me when I return? And so I think at the very least, we owe executives some sensitivity to the dynamic you're pointing to, which is your change is going to feel threatening and unknown to the people in the context you return to, both at the workplace and in your family. And you're going to have to overtly accompany them on a process of integrating and understanding what's happened for you, and invite them to participate in the transformation that's obviously ongoing.
Thank you. I really appreciate this part about explicitly helping them to do that and recognize the need for it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Emily Gould, you are next.
Hi, Emmy.
Hi, sweetheart.
Great to see you.
I'm just, I know that I'm one of many on the call who's known you for a long time. And in fact, many of us, we know each other because of you. And so also just want to bow to the community that your life's work has created and what it's, you'll never know the good you've done by being the field, creating the field that has allowed so many of us to engage in the work.
Thank you.
And I can't help but be curious because we know you for so long. if there's anything you want to say about the journey for you to write a book.
Great question.
Because that is, I'm feeling it right now in my body as a really important inflection point for you. And want to celebrate that with you.
Thank you. I'm going to answer the question slightly adjacent to the way you asked it, although what you said is so generous and obviously touching. I don't think writing a book was a threshold, but writing this book was a threshold, because for 20 years in Mobius, I've titrated the radicality both of my commitments to social justice and ecological restoration and capitalism as a thing to deconstruct or at least reflect on, and psychological depth and spiritual language. I've titrated all of that to be meeting the system of organizational life where it was. And with this book, I'm making a conscious choice just to say what I think needs to be said at this moment. And it does feel like a new threshold. It does feel a bit risky. And on the other hand, when the war started last week, I felt really grateful that this is the book I wrote. And I feel great peace that I can stand behind what I've said there and that it could be a healing resource for people. And I imagine that it will find its way to the people who are most ready and ripe for the message. And I hope that it's the beginning of, or the continuation, I should say, of a movement, many of us, including Alexander and Janice and Corentus and Mobius and many others, to spread love and healing in business. And if there's ever a moment where that's needed, this is that moment. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Emily. Deborah Huskin.
Yes, Alexander Caillet, who I met because I was crying after I listened to his presentation. Speaking of tears. Amy, thank you. You and I don't know each other well, but you are naming traditions and paths and wisdom that I've worked with for a long time. And I so appreciate, particularly even that you just named the risk that it is to speak to the things that you're speaking to. I tell my clients often that they very often, the people I work with are people who are thought leaders, who are at the tip of the arrow, flying through the air by themselves because there's not a lot of room out there, making change, making something happen. And I just want you to know, you're not alone. And I'm so glad you took the risk that you took. When you said necessary but not sufficient at the beginning of your talk, that so resonated with me, because it's so easy to push the things you're talking about away and down until all of a sudden you can't anymore. And we're at that stage, not just as individuals, but as a world community. And thank God there are people like you who are helping us articulate what's going on.
How beautiful.
Thank you.
If I could respond from my heart, Deborah, thank you for your own deep and profound walk, which I can easily feel. And I know I'm not alone. I mean, that really is, as Emily said, the beauty of having founded a community 20 years ago and worked very, very collaboratively with our seeming competitors. You know, Mobius operates as a consortium with dozens of other beautiful leadership firms with practitioners who have nothing to do with us coming and doing learning with us, and dancing with some very large global professional services firms. And I think the sense that we're not alone ought to give us more audacity to do what needs to be done. And I share very much your feeling that we're at a tipping point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Deb. I see Merrick. Come on down.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this, Alexander. Thank you. And Amy, unbelievable. I've never met you before. Today is the first time I've heard of you. A number of people have articulated the idea that you don't know all the stuff that is going on post you showing up. And I I just felt compelled. I do have a question in all this, but I do feel compelled to say, you just nudge me closer to an edge. And that edge is that idea of going into the scary, going into
How
the
wonderful.
places that we don't go into. I come out of a tradition of uh, just put your head down and get to work.
Mm.
And that's when it's really nice and congenial. So what you're saying is so needed in our societies. One question, actually, two short
But
questions.
can I say one thing first, Merrick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Put your head down and just get to work. We're going to start to see those people get very, very ill.
But we are.
And that
Yeah.
does concern me, that strategy of hyper exertion and hyper output works during a calm time, but it's going to be utterly unsustainable during this time. So I'm glad you named it, because it really is going to be consequential to intervene on people operating like that.
It is. Uh, you're right on. One question, in terms of your work, and where do you see it being accepted more? Here in the US, overseas, both?
Mm.
Great question, actually. Yeah.
I mean, Mobius operates mostly in North America and Europe. That's where our client base is. That's where the huge majority of the community is. We have a wonderful pocket of practitioners in Australia. I don't have enough of a a global perspective to really answer the question. What I can say is that in every client system that we serve, when we first encountered that system, we were told that it's a wonderful idea, but it wouldn't work here.
Right.
Wow.
Our people are too Cartesian, they're too scientific, they're too technical, they're too shut down. And there's always a threshold of just let me pilot it with a few people who are really receptive and are really eager for this. And then it becomes a momentum that the organization can't resist. So if you hit a wall in the initial invitation, I would encourage people to stay long enough to make a second one. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're a blessing.
Oh, thank you.
Jonathan, please come on down.
Hi, nice to see you. I'm thinking that part of this is also highlighting what a lot of coaches need to unlearn
Mm,
and assumptions that we need to question
mm.
about who says we shouldn't do this or can't do this. And it's a balancing act with, what's competency and what is truly not ethical. But I think so many people have been taught this is your lane, stay in it, this is what works. And now we have to undo some of that.
I agree with that, Jonathan, with one caveat. I think the majority of the constraints that people have been taught, or the guidelines for coaching, respect the fact that real trauma restorative work requires additional training. And I think, it's just worth being explicit about the fact that I believe that, and I think that's true. On the other hand, I do a lot of training for Coaches Rising. My teacher, Thomas Hubel, and I are ongoingly doing trauma-informed training for coaches and consultants to at least make people sensitized and literate about the trauma dynamics that are happening in their sessions anyway. Not to
Yeah.
ask them to widen their scope, but to ask them to be even more attuned and co-regulatory capable of managing what inevitably is going to show up in the conversation anyway. So I agree with you that some of these assumptions or hard guardrails need to soften because people are in great distress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, I'm going to read one last little excerpt,
Okay.
and then I'm going to invite you, Amy, to say whatever you want to say to close the session, okay?
Yes.
Yes. You write as a summary, and I love this little piece here. You say, let your heart break as you read of the poignant loss of this great light and pledge yourself to the journey of leadership restoration. If enough of us hold the conviction that loving business is possible and that inviting connection and true belonging in the workplace is imminent, it will become so. Let's hold one another before we lose one another. So with that, I'd just ask you, is there anything more you want to say to the people on this call today? What is your invitation, my friend?
That essay was written, I wrote it after I read news of a CEO that I knew having committed suicide. And I was tremendously grief-stricken. And I also saw it as a wake-up call to our industry, not to miss the subtle and overt signs that somebody needs help and to risk offering that help, extending that hand. So I guess what I would say, I'll say one favor and then I'll say one more aspirational thing. The favor is please buy the book and please review it on Amazon so that we can make a movement of this beautiful work and all of you can participate in it. And I hope it spreads far and wide. And the closing, I guess, prayer is that everybody on this call will continue to support each other, to experiment, to push the boundaries, to operate in new and creative and deeply soulful ways so that we can change the way that organizations function and the way leaders lead and the world, operates. I deeply pray for a world that's more just, that's more peaceful, and in which nobody is killing each other.
Thank you, Amy. And I would love to put a little plug in here for Nicholas.
Please, I'm deeply, deeply grateful to him for him joining me in this enterprise, and his essays are just beautiful throughout the book, and you'll very much enjoy getting to know his work as well.
Remarkable man.
Yeah.
Remarkable man. So kudos to you, Nicholas, wherever you are at this moment in life. Okay, I think we're done. Janice, is there anything else that we need before we say goodbye?
Yes, we would love everyone to come off mute and give Amy a huge applause, heartfelt energy. Thank you. Much needed, much loved.
Yes.
It was wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you.
Everyone have a great weekend.
Take
You
care.
too. Share the love.
All right, bye.